In this video, we are going to be graphing by table of values. On my left side, or on your left side of the screen, I have a table there that's just labeled XY. So when you're asked to graph by table of values, usually what you see is you might have one side of this table filled, and then you have to fill the second part before you go ahead to graph. And also, there's usually an equation that goes with this, and that's what we're going to be focusing on throughout this video is the equation, and then you have to fill in the other side of the table to graph. So I'm going to get straight into an example just to explain the concept a little better. Okay, so I have the table of values on the left and the equation on the bottom of that. We have the x side is filled with numbers, but the y side is blank. But then we have an equation that says y is equal to this. So we know that whatever y is, it's going to be the result of whatever this equals to. So we are going to just try and put that into context. So it's pretty easy to do. All we need to do is just take the x, plug into the equation where we see x, and solve for y. So we're going to solve for what y is when x is a -3. We have our equation y is equal to 2. Wherever we see x in the equation over here, we're going to replace it with whatever x is. So x here is -3 squared. Notice that both the -3 is like the negative and the 3 are in brackets. And we're squaring them. If you put the negative outside the bracket, it changes your answer because that is going to be a +9, not a -9. But let's keep going. We have a -4. And I like to put my x's in brackets just to keep them nice and organized. Again, -3 plus 1. So our y here is going to equal 2 times 9 plus 12 plus 1. Y is going to equal 2 times 9 is 18 plus 12 plus 1. Y going to equal 31. So here, when x is equal to -3, y will be equal to 31. Actually, I'm going to use a different color for that. Y will be equal to 31. So next we're going to do another one, -2. You're going to repeat the same step for every single number. I'm going to do another one together and then try them on your own and I'll come with the answer. So we have y equals 2 into bracket -2 squared minus 4, -2 plus 1. Again, y here would be equal to 8 minus or add 8 plus 1. Y will be equal to 17. So y here is 17. Okay, try the rest on your own and we'll be back. Okay, so here is the final answer for the table. So now we have what the table looks like. We've filled in our x and y, and here comes the easy part, right? Is to graph this, put it into the graph. Okay, so here we have a graph, and we are going to just graph our points. Pretty simple. Put your points. When graphing, I think in math, it's always very important to label your points on the graph, except you're told not to. I think if you're asked to graph, just always remember to label your points on your graph. And there are different ways that you can do that, right? You can maybe just put them in brackets or put an arrow pointing to the point and then put in the points, something like that. Usually your points are in brackets in the order XY, except you're told otherwise, always XY. From what I know. Okay, so we have a graph XY. Do not get confused. You could label your graph XY. Okay, so we have -3 and 31. Ooh. -3 and 31 is the first one that we have, and that is such a huge number. For me, I would personally just leave that one out and try to do the numbers that are physically on my graph. You don't need to graph every single number, every single point. You don't need to plot them on your graph, except you're told to do that. So I would just skip -3 and 31. I would also skip -2 and 17. Usually, when I was learning this, my teacher said that we needed 5 points. So 5 points on the graph. So talk with your teacher, talk with your instructor, and be sure of what they want to see on your graph and communicate that with them. So I'm going to do -1 and 7. That's a quite easy one, and I can plot that. So we have a -1 on the x and a 7. So this is a little harder because they're not line graph in the way, like it's not like, your regular graph paper. So it's a little hard to kind of pinpoint where -1 and 7 is, but you can try and get as accurate as possible. Next, we have a 0 and a -1. So 0 on x and a +1, pardon me, on y. So right there. Then we have a 1 and a -1. So we have 1, -1, point right there. Then we have 2 and 1, point right there. And we have 3 and 7, which would be a point right about here. Okay, now we can connect. Ooh, that's a very, very interesting parabola. But we can connect it, and adding arrows at the end is super important, especially when you're not, like, you can't just go in and draw every single point. Like in this case, I didn't draw my -3 and 31, but the arrows let the person looking at this know that the parabola keeps going, right? It doesn't just stop at, -1, -7, -1, 7, and 3 and 7. It keeps going, and so my -3 and 31 is accounted for, and my -2 and 17 is accounted for in this graph. So this is how we do this. Now you might be asked for some other things. Now if you've seen the video where I identified the characteristics of a parabola, that would be really helpful for this step. You might be asked to identify some things of the parabola. Like you might be asked to identify the vertex, the axis of symmetry, the domain, the range, your values, the intercepts. Make sure you go check out that video so you can understand how to do that. I don't really want to go over it too in depth in this video, but if you were asked to find the vertex, again, the vertex is the pick point, and our pick point here is, I'm just going to put vertex, and you always go in the form xy is 1, -1. Our axis of symmetry would be x equals 1, because that's where the graph folds. Our minimum or maximum value, this is a minimum value at y equals -1. But you can find the intercept. Again, if you're asked to find the intercept, you make the opposite equal 0. So if you want to find y-intercept, you're going to make your x equal 0 in your equation, right? Remember our equation in this page was y equals 2x squared minus 4x plus 1. So you're going to make y equal to 0 if you want to find your x-intercepts, and you're going to make your x equal to 0 to find your y-intercept. So you're going to kind of play with that to find your intercept. But for the most part, that is basically what this is. You're just graphing by table of values, filling your values based on the equation, and just graph. Remember to plot your points. I literally said that, but I almost forgot. So here we have -1 and 7. Again, especially when my graph is not aligned or is not clearly stated, right? Because I mean, still label anyway, but I have a graph like this that someone might read this as maybe a my negative 0.8 to a 7 or something like that. But labeling is given an assurance, especially when we get into questions where we have to turn graphs back into equations, right? So when you're given a graph on x to turn it into an equation, labeling points and points that are clearly labeled makes it so much easier to do, even if your teachers are pretty much not going to give you points that are labeled, but they will usually make sure that it's in a nice spot on the graph. So here we have 3 and 7, 0 and 1, 2 and 1, and 1 and negative 1. Okay, so those are our points on this graph, and that is it for this video. I hope you guys learned something new. Practice makes perfect. I know, broken record, but I really do think that you should practice the work. You're gonna get it. It's pretty simple. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.